Listen closely, because the next 8 seconds are the kind you don't forget. Imagine this. A circle of exhausted refugees in a Brooklyn yard, 1863. Their faces lit only by dying lamplight. And 23 pairs of eyes suddenly widening, pupils dilating, as if they've just tasted freedom for the first time, and sensed death standing right behind it. Now hold that image. Because the truth is this. The moment those 23 souls tasted those hamburgers, they crossed an invisible line. A line that separates the world you think you live in from the machinery that actually governs it. And by the time you finish this story, you'll understand something most people never do. No system north or south, past or present lets its captives go without a price. The textbooks will tell you the North was safe in 1863, that escaping to Brooklyn meant survival, dignity, a chance to breathe. But what they never mention is the thing every runaway already knew. Sometimes the chain isn't around your neck. Sometimes it's around your absence. You see, when those 23 refugees from Georgia arrived thin, wary, holding their children like shields, they carried more than trauma. They carried secrets. Secrets from a plantation that should have died long before they escaped. Secrets that certain men in New York, men with influence, with money, with ties to the docks and the courts, were willing to bury under any cost. Even if that cost was 23 lives. And here's what history won't tell you. The North didn't need whips or auction blocks to silence a threat. It used something far cleaner: paperwork, silence, dim corridors, and the quiet understanding that certain people were never meant to be found once they disappeared. But that night, that meal, that was the crack in the illusion. Picture it. A simple German-style hamburger soft roll, warm beef, salt, pepper. Nothing grand. Yet to people who'd spent their entire lives being fed scraps tossed like insults, it was a revelation. A message. A recognition of their humanity so powerful it broke them open. 17 adults and 6 children crying uncontrollably, not from suffering but from remembering they were human. And that kind of awakening, that kind of emotional ignition, that is dangerous. Because once a person realizes they deserve dignity, they stop being manageable. And in systems built on control, whether plantations or governments, that is the moment the machine begins to tighten its grip. Now let's step further into the dark. Because the night after that first taste of freedom, someone else tasted fear, and someone else began hunting. The second night should have been calm. A rare pocket of peace for people who had outrun death for 7 long months. But peace is the bait before the snare, and they felt it, even if they didn't yet understand why. Brooklyn in 1863 wasn't a sanctuary. It was a pressure chamber. Draft riots had barely cooled. Hatred simmered under every doorstep, and the so-called abolitionist haven across the East River wasn't run by saints. It was run by merchants, officers, and men with enough wealth to hide whatever truth needed hiding. And the 23? They didn't walk into safety. They walked into someone's unfinished business. That night, after the hamburgers, after the sobbing, after the emotional flood that left them hollow and trembling, the camp felt different. The volunteers sensed it. The children sensed it. And Patience, the quiet, iron-willed woman who led them, she sensed it most of all. She kept her people close, sitting in a tight circle behind the eastern barracks. Their bodies leaned inward. Their voices fell to whispers. Every few seconds, one of them would glance toward the perimeter, as if expecting the trees themselves to step forward and speak. Because some shadows weren't shadows. Some were men. The records don't mention him. Of course they don't. But witnesses spoke years later, after reputations no longer mattered. They described a white man in a dark coat standing just beyond the lamplight, still, silent, watching. Not curious. Not compassionate. Waiting. He had been there before the meal. He remained long after. And when the lamps dimmed, he walked toward the ferry road, where 2 more men were waiting for him. 3 shadows. 3 directions. 1 purpose. You need to understand something. Runaway slaves didn't just disappear in the North. Their names vanished from ledgers. Their faces vanished from witness statements. And their stories, especially the inconvenient ones, were swallowed by a system that cared more about political stability than human truth. Because even in a free state, freedom is fragile when the powerful fear what you know. And those 23? They weren't simply refugees. They weren't just survivors. They were witnesses to something buried back at Pritchard's Landing. Something worth crossing states, paying men, altering records, and making sure no voice remained to speak of it. The next morning proved it. Because when the sun rose over Brooklyn on August 31 St., one of the children, little Ruth, was gone. Not wandered. Not lost. Removed. At first, they tried to pretend it was an accident. That maybe Ruth had wandered off to chase a gull near the shoreline. That maybe she'd fallen asleep behind a stack of laundry crates. Anything but the truth simmering beneath every heartbeat in that camp. But Patience knew better the instant she saw the empty space where the child had been. She didn't scream, didn't panic. She simply stood there, very still, her jaw tightening with an old, familiar kind of dread. The kind born on plantations, where a missing child was never a mystery, only a message. Volunteers fanned out, calling for Ruth. They searched laundry lines, wells, storage sheds. Anna Mueller checked the shoreline 3 times, trembling as she shouted the girl's name into the wind. But Patience didn't move. She just watched the treeline. The same treeline where the silent man had stood the night before. When Thomas Rutherford, the free black volunteer, approached her, she finally spoke. "She ain't lost," she whispered. "They took her." Thomas's face hardened, because he'd heard those words before. He knew the weight of them. He knew the truth behind them. And he knew what Northern authorities did when a black child disappeared in 1863. Nothing. Nothing at all. Still, protocol demanded a report. So Harold Grayson, the merchant philanthropist funding the camp, sent a runner to the local precinct. 2 hours later, the runner returned, breathless, holding the message he'd been given. "Delay investigating. The child is likely hiding or confused. Wait 24 hours. Everyone understood what that meant. A missing white child brought immediate alarms. A missing black refugee child was an inconvenience to be minimized, then forgotten. But the 23 didn't forget. They tightened formation, moving as a single body again, shoulder to shoulder, eyes awake, senses sharpened by memories of dogs, overseers, and night riders. Then, something else happened. The infant Hope began to cry. Not a normal cry. Not hunger. Not discomfort. It was a keening, shaking wail that made Patience jolt as if struck. She snatched the baby up and whispered fiercely in Gullah, rocking her, shushing her. But the crying only grew louder, raw, desperate, terrified. It was the same kind of cry that had torn through them when they tasted those hamburgers. Only now there was no joy in it, only warning. And with each cry, the others felt it too. A pressure in the air, a familiar, suffocating tension they had prayed they'd left behind in Georgia. Someone had followed them. Someone had found them. And whoever took Ruth wasn't done. Because systems built on domination don't stop at one. They come back for the rest. By midday, whispers had spread through the entire camp. Not just that Ruth was missing, but that her disappearance felt wrong in a way every formerly enslaved person recognized instantly. It wasn't the randomness of a child wandering. It was the precision of a hand that knew exactly what it wanted. Patience gathered her people behind the barracks, the same place where they'd wept over the hamburgers just 2 nights earlier. 17 adults, 5 children, 1 infant, all shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on her like she was the last anchor holding them to sanity. She didn't speak loudly. She didn't need to. "They hear," she murmured. "Not someone. Not maybe. Just, they hear." For a moment, the camp seemed to tilt, because everyone who heard her felt the same cold truth sliding down their spine. Patience wasn't talking about kidnappers. She wasn't talking about criminals. She was talking about owners. Meanwhile, Grayson paced the yard, frustrated, muttering about political pressure, about the riots still raw in the city, about how complications could jeopardize his funding. He meant well, but he was a man of the system, tied to the newspapers, the shipping guilds, the donors, and the polished world of gentlemen's agreements. He didn't understand what patience did. When a slave catcher wants you, the law doesn't see you as a person. It sees you as property returning to its rightful place. That was the silent rule Northern officials didn't like written, but still obeyed. Thomas Rutherford, on the other hand, understood perfectly. He pulled Patience aside. "If they're after you," he said quietly, "you need to tell me why. What did you all see?" Her reaction was small, a tightening around her eyes, a flicker of something ancient and painful. But she didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, she looked toward the docks, toward the place where two other men had waited the night before. Her voice dropped low, almost inaudible. "We ain't supposed to speak on what we saw. Not to you. Not to no one." Thomas wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. Just afraid. Because people who refuse to speak aren't hiding fear. They're hiding knowledge. Knowledge with consequences. He tried again. "Patience. If you want help, I need to understand." She closed her eyes. "If we tell it," she whispered, "it won't just be Ruth they take." Before Thomas could press further, a shriek tore through the camp. One of the children had found something on the edge of the treeline. A footprint. A man's boot print. Fresh, deep, facing outward, not inward. Whoever had taken Ruth hadn't run away. He had walked calmly back into the city, as if protected, as if expected. And that was the moment the 23 realized the truth. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a retrieval. The footprint changed everything. It was the kind of detail a careless man leaves, but a confident one doesn't bother to hide. A deep, deliberate imprint, heel angled toward the city. Not the woods. Not the water. Not escape. Return. It meant someone could come and go from the camp without fear. Without resistance. Without consequences. Patience stared at the print for a long time. Her people stood behind her, trembling. But she knelt down, touched the disturbed earth with the back of her fingers, and closed her eyes. "She ain't cry," Patience murmured. If Ruth was scared, she'd have screamed. She didn't. She knew that hand. The adults looked at each other. A murmur rippled through the group, low, painful, resigned. Because there's a specific kind of terror only enslaved people understand. The moment your mind accepts something your soul refuses to believe. Someone from the plantation had come for her. Thomas felt sick. "Patience. If you don't tell me what's happening, I can't protect any of you." Patience finally turned to him. Her eyes weren't fearful anymore. They were resolved, like someone choosing between two terrible truths. "Back home," she said softly, "we saw something we weren't meant to witness. Something the Pritchards would kill to keep from the world." Thomas leaned in. "What did you see?" But she shook her head hard. "No. Not yet. Once spoken, it don't go back. Once heard, it marks you." And then, she did something Thomas didn't expect. She placed her hand over his heart. "You a good man. That's why I can't break you with this truth until you ready." He stared at her, breath unsteady. "What truth?" She took a long, trembling breath. "The kind that change who you are. The kind that make enemies you can't see." Before he could answer, a commotion erupted near the barracks. Harold Grayson was arguing with two newly arrived policeman officers Thomas didn't recognize. They weren't local. They weren't curious. They weren't hunting. They were confirming. Their voices carried across the yard. "No investigation. No moevelesastion. You'll stand down until notified." Thomas felt the ground tilt. Patience didn't react. Her people didn't react. They'd expected exactly this. Because when the system speaks in absolutes, you don't fight its words. You read its intentions. Now listen closely, because you've followed me this far, and the descent is shifting. If you're sensing the deeper pattern here, if you're feeling the machinery behind the story, comment, "I see the Watchers twice." Not once, twice. Lock it in. Anchor your awareness. Because we're crossing from the visible into the forbidden. And once you step through, you don't step back. Night fell with a heaviness that didn't belong to weather. felt manufactured. Like the darkness itself was being lowered over the camp, inch by inch, to isolate the 23 from the rest of the world. Every lantern seemed dimmer. Every shadow stretched too far. And every sound, every rustle, every footstep carried a meaning no one dared voice. Patience ordered her people inside the barracks and positioned the adults around the children like a living shield. No one slept. No one even lay down. They just waited, with the kind of silence forged only by years under a regime where noise could cost you your life. Thomas remained with them, not because he wasn't afraid he was, but because something inside him had shifted when Patience placed her hand over his heart. She had given him a warning disguised as mercy, and now he felt the weight of knowledge he didn't even possess yet, tightening around him like a noose. Just after midnight, a knock sounded at the barracks door. 3 taps. A pause. 2 taps. Patience inhaled sharply. "That's a signal," she whispered. Thomas's muscles locked. He moved toward the door, but Patience caught his arm. "Don't you open that. Not till they speak." Another knock. The same pattern. Then a voice through the wood. "We ain't here to hurt nobody. Just to skin questions about a child." Thomas recognized the accent. Georgia low country. Plantation country. Patience shook her head slowly, whispering so only he could hear. "That ain't the voice that belongs to the man knockin'. They usin' another to soften the door." The adults tightened formation around the children. Hope, the infant, began to whimper, not in fear but in recognition. Thomas stepped forward before he could stop himself. "What do you want?" he shouted. A pause. Then the voice answered, "We want what's ours." Patience's people shook, but not from shock, from memory, from familiarity. This wasn't a kidnapping. This wasn't a hunt. This was a claim. Thomas grabbed a lantern and peered through a gap in the boards. Outside, 2 men stood in the open, but the third lingered back in the treeline, half hidden. The man in the dark coat, the watcher. Thomas felt cold venom crawl up his spine. "You have no authority here," he shouted. The man in the coat finally stepped forward, into the lantern glow, and Thomas saw the emblem pinned beneath his lapel. A northern badge. Not police. Not military. Worse, an interstate recovery agent. A legal arm of the Fugitive Slave Act operating in secret after the riots. A man who could bypass precincts, bypass courts, bypass morals. A man above the law, whose job wasn't to enforce justice, but to erase the inconvenient. He looked at the barracks door and spoke directly to Thomas. "Step aside, son. You don't know what these people are carrying, and you don't want to." Patience exhaled like someone hearing a prophecy fulfilled. "Thomas," she whispered, "they ain't just after us." Her voice trembled. "They after what we brought with us." The barracks fell silent, and the descent deepened. The words hung in the air like a blade suspended by a single thread. "Not what we are, what we brought." Thomas felt his throat tighten, because people run with memories. People run with trauma. People run with secrets whispered under the lash. But Patience was talking about something else. Something tangible, something carried across states, through swamps, over rivers, hidden for 7 long months. Something worth killing for. The men outside shifted. Boots scraped the dirt. Metal clicked softly. The sound of a firearm being primed out of patience rather than necessity. "Open the door," the recovery agent said, "and nobody gets hurt." Patience moved in front of her people like a protective wall. Her voice quiet, steady, cut through the panic. "You tell your master he can't have it back." Thomas's breath caught. She wasn't negotiating. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't even afraid. She was defying. The agent stepped closer. Lantern light carved harsh lines into his expression. "You think this is about your freedom?" he asked. "It ain't. That's already been decided. What we want is what was taken." The barracks erupted in whispers.
Urgent, hushed, terrified.
Thomas turned to Patience. "What did you take?" Her eyes flicked toward a bundle wrapped in a faded cloth near the children. He had assumed it was bedding, but now he saw how the adults guarded it. how the children sat close to it, how patience had kept it within arm's reach every moment since their arrival. "Not taken," she whispered. "Saved." Outside, the agent knocked once more. Not a request this time. A warning. Patience knelt beside the bundle and slowly unwrapped the cloth. Thomas leaned in and froze. Inside lay pages. Hundreds of them. Some torn from ledgers. Some copied by hand. Some covered in symbols and coded language he didn't recognize. Documents. Records. Proof. But not of simple abuse or cruelty. These pages contained names. Of men in New York, Philadelphia, Boston. Men who financed ships. Men who laundered Southern money through Northern banks. Men who publicly condemned slavery while privately profiting from the very plantations they pretended to oppose. Men whose empires depended on silence. Thomas realized, with a jolt of nausea, that the 23 were not just refugees. They were the last witnesses to a financial network powerful enough to bury newspapers, bribe officers, alter court logs, and disappear entire human beings. This wasn't a hunt. This wasn't even a cover-up. It was maintenance, the system preserving itself. Patience touched the documents with a trembling hand. "We seen the books," she whispered. "We seen who they really work for." Thomas staggered back. That was the moment he understood something. If this truth ever reached the public, it wouldn't just topple a plantation. It would expose a northern empire built on southern chains. Outside, the agent spoke again, this time with calm, final certainty. "You open this door, or we open it for you." The lanterns flickered. The night held its breath. And the 23 braced themselves, because the system had arrived to reclaim its secrets. In the choking silence that followed the bell's last toll, the truth stood naked, raw, undeniable, and hungrier than any creature lurking beyond the plantation pines. Because what happened next wasn't simply a conclusion. It was an exchange, a passing of a burden, a transfer of a wound, a legacy sealed in breath and blood. Slow push in on Samuel as the dawn light fractures across his face. Samuel felt at first a pressure behind his ribs, an ache that didn't belong to him, the weight of the circle that had been carved into the floorboards. The oath whispered in the dark. The truth Harriet had died to reveal. It all surged into him like a tide that did not care if it drowned him. Because the secret wasn't meant to die with her. It was meant to choose. And it chose him. Plantation grounds, quiet but not peaceful. The colonel's body lay where the shadows had dropped him, twisted in a contorted stillness that the dawn refused to soften. His last expression was one of recognition of a fate he could no longer outrun. But Samuel did not look at the man who had owned him. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, as if hearing a call, as if remembering words Harriet had spoken only once but forever. "Blood tells a story, but you must decide if you end it or rewrite it." Samuel gripping Harriet's journal, her final pages fluttering in the wind. He tore the journal free from the colonel's coat where the man had tried to hide it, destroy it, bury it under lies. The book pulsed warm in Samuel's hand, not with magic, but with memory. Her handwriting shaking, fading, yet fierce, mapped out a lineage older than any plantation title. A lineage of watchers, guardians, witnesses from the shadows nobody dared name. And Samuel realized, Harriet was never the end. She had been the threshold. From the tree line, figures appeared not spectral, not monstrous, but human. People who had run. People who had survived. People Harriet had sent messages to in ways the colonel never deciphered. A hidden community. An unseen resistance. A bloodline awakened. Their leader stepped forward, an elder woman with eyes like polished coal that had seen fire and refused to crack. She looked at Samuel and bowed, not in submission, in recognition. The morning sun rose, but the shadows did not retreat. They gathered behind Samuel, long, tall, resolute. This was not escape, not victory, not even justice. This was a continuation. The curse, the legacy, the truth Harriet had protected, Samuel now carried it. Not as a victim, not as a slave, but as the next keeper. And as he crossed the threshold into the trees, the world shifted just slightly, just enough because one story had ended, but an older one had finally begun.